My sermon title is called The Whole Life Offering, but don't be afraid, this is not a stewardship sermon. I promise. Not exactly. We are going to be talking about different kinds of offerings during this next few weeks, and so as we're getting started on the topic now, I don't know if you heard about a little boy who didn't want to put his money in the offering plate one Sunday. I don't know if you've heard this story. And he was saving up, I guess, for something he really wanted to buy for himself. So his mom gave him some money to put in the offering plate, but he didn't want to put it in there. And so the plate was passing by, and so mom was trying to think fast what kind of logic she could use. And so suddenly she whispered to her son and said, "You don't want that money, honey. It's tainted. Drop it in the plate, quick, it's tainted." And so the little boy was scared. He just threw that money right in the offering plate. And but he was thinking for a minute as the offering finished up, and the boy asked his mom after a few minutes, "Mommy, why was the money tainted? Was it dirty? I mean, had it been in the ground or something? Why was it tainted?" And the mom said, "No, dear, it just tain't yours and tain't mine. It's God's." Nice, right? Well, I repeat, this tain't a stewardship sermon. But not exactly. I want to share some insights with you over the next few weeks from what I think is a really amazing book. It's been out for a few years now. It's not exactly a bestseller. It's what I would call a stealth classic. That means I really like it, but nobody bought it. Just kidding. Some people bought it. But I was kind of jealous when I heard about it because it was the kind of book that I've been thinking about a lot of the themes that he brought out in the book, and I thought, I should have written that book. I was thinking about this for a long time. I probably would have written it a little bit differently than he did, but anyway, his name's Eric Foley, and the book is called The Whole Life Offering, Christianity as Philanthropy. I'm going to be talking, bringing out some insights from that book during the next few weeks, as well as some of my own thoughts on things. But I'd like to look at that first part of his title, The Whole Life Offering, because I think it's a really great title. And so the first question that comes up is, what is an offering? We have this time we call tithes and offerings, every Sunday, and we give offering envelopes and all that kind of stuff. But what exactly is an offering? And I guess the short answer is, it's something that we offer up to God, right? Anything that we offer up to God. Nowadays, we usually think of cash or coins or a check that we write and put in an envelope, right? Back in the days of Jesus, when they thought of offering, they would have thought of living animals, right? That were being offered at the temple in honor to God as a burnt offering. Probably the Humane Society is really happy we Christians gave that up a long time ago, so we don't do any of those kind of things to animals. But there were a lot of different ways of giving offerings. And it's not only a Christian thing, it's a thing of all religions, really. I mean, every religion I've ever known about, whether it was Buddhism or Islam or Judaism or Christianity, there was always a concept of giving something, money, resources, material goods of some kind, to the temple, to the mosque, to the church, for the maintenance of the religion, as well as for God's glory. Nowadays, we think more about what we call the 3 T's. Does anybody know the 3 T's? What are the 3 T's? Come on, Presbyterians. Some of you guys ought to know this. Time, talents, treasures, right? T. Time, talents, treasures. So we think of all of those kind of things as things that we would offer to God, right? Stuff that we would offer up to God. We don't just focus on money. We don't just say, give me your money, give me your money. That's, television programs. I don't do that, right? But we talk about your time, your talents, your abilities, right? Your skills, offering your resources, your time, and of course, your financial resources to God, to the church, in a variety of different ways. Well, Jesus brings things in a little bit different direction. I guess religions over time, after we built up this thing called Christianity, we started to think about these concepts of offering plates or offering baskets or offering, containers where people put things in. But you can't read much of the New Testament without feeling that Jesus is working on something a little deeper than just putting a goat on the altar or writing a check and dropping it in an offering plate. Jesus says things to his disciples like, freely you have given, so give freely. If you're bringing your offering to the altar and you realize your brother or sister has something against you, then go, be reconciled to your brother or sister first, and then come and give your offering. Take up your cross daily and follow me. These are things that do not fit well with this concept of just dropping some money into the offering plate, or showing up once a week for some kind of a church activity, or even preaching or singing in front of a church. They seem to ask a lot more of us than those simple things. Well, there's a great story about Francis of Assisi, or Saint Francis as the Catholics call him. Francis, some people call him the patron saint of animals, so you may have seen him as a statue with like some birds in each hand or something like that. Francis was a real person. He was a human being. He was a very prayerful and introspective kind of person, and he was very, very generous. If he felt God wanted him to give something to somebody, he would just do it. It wouldn't matter if it was the clothes on his back, the shoes off his feet, or the money in his pocket. He would just do according to how he felt the Spirit was moving him. Well, he was a very prayerful person, and he had this particular place he liked to go out in the forest to pray. It was actually an abandoned church. It was a little chapel, little one-room chapel out in the forest. And I guess at one point, 100 years or so before Francis of Assisi was born, it had been a very thriving Christian community, and now it had been abandoned. So the church was just left there, exposed to the elements. It had a wooden roof, but the roof fell in, and he kind of liked it because you go into this church building and you could see the sky, and you could just pray and nobody would bother you, right? So Francis was in this chapel just praying as he habitually did. I don't know if he was going like every day or every week. I don't know what his schedule was. But while he was praying one day, he heard God's voice speaking to him, saying, Francis, you can see that my church is falling down. I want you to rebuild it. And so Francis looked up from his prayers and he looked around at this little chapel he was in, and he was like, okay, I can do that. I know a little bit of carpentry. And so he went back to town and he got some hammers and some nails and some saws and bought some wood, and he brought all that stuff out there, and just all by himself he started fixing up this church, tacking up boards, trying to patch the holes in the roof, just having a good old time. And maybe for days and days he was doing that. One day he was in the middle of his work, and he heard God's voice again. Francis, the Lord said, what are you doing? He said, well, you told me to fix the church, so I'm fixing it. That's what I'm doing. And God said, I wasn't talking about this building. I meant the church. I want you to fix the church, capital C. And so all of a sudden, Francis' eyes opened to what God's purpose for him was. It wasn't to patch up some holes in something. It was to give everything that he was, everything that he had, for the benefit of the body of Christ, Christ's church in the world at that time. God wanted from Francis a whole life offering. And so that's the question that comes out of this book. What if we are the offering? What if you and me are the offerings? What if offerings are not just something that we're supposed to give to God, just something we're supposed to put in a plate or something we're supposed to do? What if the offering is us? Paul and Peter bring out some of these ways of understanding God's plan in various parts of the New Testament. I'll give you a couple of scriptures here just as examples. Romans chapter 12, verse 1, where Paul talks about offering yourself as living sacrifices, right? Living offerings. That word sacrifice, we often think of sacrifice as something we have to give up, but the word sacrifice is meant offerings, just like the offerings you would put in the plate. For the folks of those days, it was the same thing. So offer yourself, offer your bodies as a living offering, holy and pleasing to God. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 6, Paul talks about his own situation. He says, I'm already being poured out like a drink offering before the Lord. You know, he realized his time was near, and he was thinking of it in terms of he's becoming that offering, being poured out before the Lord. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 2, Peter follows a similar vein. He speaks of living stones, right? Being built into a spiritual house, a temple, a holy priesthood, speaking of the church, right? Offering spiritual sacrifices, spiritual offerings, acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. We can see this sense of the whole life offering in the text that we read today, also from John chapter 21, verses 15 through 19. This is a text probably many of us know well if you've been around the church at all after Easter. If you didn't take your post-Easter vacations, as many people do, you probably know this text very well, because around this time every year, we bring out this same text from John chapter 21, one of the post-Easter appearances of Jesus Christ, right? Where everybody has gone back to fishing. We were actually, in our Spanish Bible study this week, we were talking about this text. And everybody's gone off on a fishing trip, going back to their old neighborhood and their old place. And so Peter and all the disciples, or most of them, were there. And you remember this story? We read part of it today. They were fishing all night. They caught nothing. And Jesus said, throw your nets on the other side of the boat. And as soon as they did that, they caught tons of fish. And John, the apostle, immediately recognized this was Jesus. And he said, it's the Lord. Peter jumps out of the boat, swims to shore, and they have breakfast with Jesus on the beach. And then suddenly, Jesus begins to ask those questions that we were reading about this morning. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Simon was Peter's birth name, right? And we always focus on how Jesus restored Peter back to his position as leader of the church, right? That's where we usually draw our focus in this text. But right after that comes something really important. As soon as Peter is restored to his position of leadership, without any explanation, Jesus says, very truly, I tell you, when you were young, you dressed yourself, you went where you wanted. But when you become old, you will stretch out your hands, and you will be led to a place where you do not want to go. In other words, Peter had to prepare himself to give his whole life as an offering to God. God wasn't just offering him a good job. God wasn't just telling him, I'm going to make you boss of everything. Right? He said, you got to get ready because you are going to be an offering. Your life is going to be a life of service, of giving to others. And in the end, Jesus told him, you're going to leave this world just like I did, sacrificed, nailed to a cross. Get ready for that life of service. So again, the point that Eric Foley, the author of this book, makes that is important for us to get a hold of is that God is not ultimately interested in those 3 T's, in your time, your talents, your treasures. He's not after your money. He's not after your time. He doesn't want you to be a slave to him of some kind or another. God is after you. God is after me. Full stop. The offering God is interested in is all that we are, warts and all. In the book, Eric sums it up with a wonderful phrase. He says, the donor, not the donation, is the offering. What God is after is the donor, not the donation. There's none of this, just give me $20 and I'll bless you this way or the other way, right? Like we hear sometimes on the television. It's not like that. God is after you and me. And so the question comes after that, if we are to be living offerings, how then should we live? And Eric has a lot to say about what he calls philanthropy, Christian philanthropy. We won't get into that too much today. Philanthropy is a word we know about, being generous. And if we think about the word philanthropy, we usually think about someone like Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or somebody who's got almost as much money as God does, and giving lots of it away, which doesn't hurt him any or her any because they're super mega rich, and so it doesn't make a big impact in their pocketbook, right? That's what we tend to think about for philanthropy. The word philanthropy comes from a Greek word, philanthropos, which means one who loves other human beings. The Greeks and the Romans back in those days had a culture of philanthropy a lot like ours. Rich people who would give not only money, but whole buildings, temples, public baths. There was no welfare system, there was no social security in those days. So they counted on rich donors to give the roads, to give the baths, to give the sewage systems, to give everything that the city had. And they talked about those philanthropists, those generous donors, right? Well, it turns out that the meaning of philanthropy is one who loves other human beings. And it's very interesting that in the Bible, in Titus chapter 3, verses 4 and 5, Paul says, when the kindness, but he uses the word philanthropy, when the philanthropy of God our Savior appeared, Jesus, he saved us not because of the righteous things we had done, but because of his mercy. Paul is saying here that Jesus is the philanthropist, right? The person who gave not stuff, not buildings, not money, but gave himself for each one of us. As we prepare to come to the table this morning, being a Christian philanthropist means loving others just as Christ has loved us. Think about how this vision of Christ giving of himself is so much more powerful than the Romans, the Greeks, the billionaires of this world, Ted Turner and whoever, giving money to the poor, building temples with their names carved in the side of them, right? That's not philanthropy, according to the Bible. That's throwing some crumbs to the dogs compared to what Jesus was about and what he calls us to be about. He gave all of himself for us. And he invites us to that same path of self-giving. This table that we come to is the table of the philanthropist, Jesus himself, the one who loved us completely. At this table, we have value because Jesus Christ set the table for each one of us. No matter what we've done, no matter what race or class or creed we come from, Jesus has offered himself to us at this table. His body, his blood. Don't ever think that you have nothing to give, because he has already given everything for each one of us. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for your example of self-giving, the way you have given yourself to each one of us, the way that you prepare us to give ourselves to others for your glory. Prepare our hearts and our minds to come to this table where you have given yourself to us. We pray these things in Jesus' name.